The other real world challenge is the higher capex costs of green technologies. And the fact that if you ask customers in India, are you willing to pay more for green cement, of green steel, green iron? Most will say, let's just get it at the best price possible. Yeah. In Europe, that may not necessarily be the case. Consumers are more aware, therefore more willing to pay than they would for something produced with fossil fuels. How do we deal with that challenge? The fact that, I read some of the case studies that you sent, the companies are dealing very clearly with the challenge of having to spend more upfront. The government isn't necessarily subsidizing that. Yeah. How do we create an ecosystem which enables companies to make those initial outlays?
Yeah, I think one of the things which, again, I would say, what in a lot of our research which we've done in the US and in the European companies, is that the companies which have, and think about the short term versus long term. I mean, you have to invest more in CapEx. It'll hit your earnings near time because you may need to borrow more and all that. But actually the companies that have made this transition, and actually the energy industry is a classic example, particularly in Europe. The companies that 5 or 8 years ago made huge investments in moving away from fossil fuel to renewable-based energy sources, utilities, as an example, actually may have hit earnings near time, but their PE multiples are significantly higher than the ones that are still oil and fuel based. So they've actually, I think that, and we've seen this in other industries, there is a huge opportunity for multiple expansion. So as you analyze corporate stocks, I think thinking about like who are not just producing like this kind of glossy ESG report, I've done sustainability and I'm great, who are actually taking very active, proactive steps. Because this issue is going to catch up with you. At some point, regulation is going to come in strong. I mean, governments would be remiss actually not to do it, whether it be some sort of taxation, which is already happening in Europe, or some great incentive systems where if companies that are ahead of the curve can actually take advantage of these incentive systems in a much more positive way. So I think over here, even by the way, there may be some people willing to pay green premium. Sometimes, my students will also say, oh, green premium, this and that. And by the way, Rahul was one of our star students. He was like a celebrity at HBS. I remember all the Indian students only want to take pictures with him and nobody else. But even, you look at even those students in the US who will like, Massachusetts, blue state and all that, and we'll talk about green. You actually ask them to pay a little premium for a product. So even there, it's not quite there. So I think this reason that, you should pay premium because it does good for the world, maybe appeals to a few, but I don't think that's the solution. The solution really is that over a period of time, that, fossil fuels, oil and gas, there's this thing called a stranded asset issue, and people are not kind of fully appreciating that a lot of these companies are actually valued on their reserves and how they'll exploit it over time. But if you reach a stage where you actually can't exploit that because there's no demand anymore because everyone's moved to renewables or some other form of technology, like in steel, moving from blast furnace to DRI, your assets are stranded, and therefore that company is overvalued. So I think, looking at companies that are truly trying to address this issue, I would strongly encourage you to actually invest in them, because even though their earnings may actually get hit near term, because of regulation, because of the stranded asset issue, because they get ahead of the curve from a competitive standpoint, I've seen their PE multiples expand quite a bit.